This video is part of a whole course called Post-Production Workflow. If you want to watch the rest of the videos, go to videomaker.com/courses or click the link in the description.
Organization is a key component to streamlining your edit workflow. The foundation of good organization starts long before you open up your editing program. Two primary methods to keep your assets organized are a standard folder structure for all your assets and a standard naming convention. There's certainly many ways to accomplish this. If you're working in a team environment, this organizational system may already be in place, and you'll merely have to conform your practices to match up with the standards that are already set. If you're on your own, you're free to design a system that works for you. We'll walk you through one process so you can get an idea of a typical workflow. Okay, so we're talking about creating a folder structure template here. And what we have here is our template folder that we copy paste whenever we're creating a new project. And this is basically the copy pasted version that we've retitled. So we're gonna look into this one and see what's inside. Now first, the way that we title it, we like to use a 6-digit date format. So this is August 15th, 2014. Underscore, and then the name of the project. The reason we use underscores instead of spaces is because we tend to share the link to those folders from time to time, and the underscores just makes that a little cleaner when you paste the link. So also adding the date this way allows us to sort by name, and it'll basically list our projects in chronological order from when we started, because from time to time, we may work on 50, 60 projects a year, so it just sort of helps us keep a timeline. So let's crack it open and see what's inside. To start with, we have our projects folder. Now the reason we put the underscore before projects is to keep it at the top of the list when we're sorting by name. I like to just have that folder first. And then we have audio, EDLs, don't worry if you don't know what those are, final exports, footage, graphics, and renders. So within each one of these folders, there's usually some subfolders. Double-click projects, and these are the ones we have by default. We have After Effects, Avid, Camtasia, Premiere, and Resolve. Now there might be certain projects where we don't use all of these. Maybe I'm not doing any screen records, or maybe I'm not using Resolve, and that's fine. Those folders will just stay empty. The most important thing is I'm not having to constantly create new folders every time I start a project, and this is the primary programs that we tend to use. So within any one of these folders would be, for instance, Premiere. Here's where the actual Premiere project lives. These two folders are actually created by Premiere, and those don't exist when we copy paste the template. Okay, back into our main folder here. In audio, I divide that up into music, sound effects, and VO. So the VO would be like dialogue and narration and things like that. The EDLs is where I put the edit decision lists. So if I'm working and coordinating with two different programs, maybe in my primary folder, if I'm using Premiere, I would export an EDL or AAF or XML file, and I would save it there just so I know it came from Premiere or whatever my primary editor is. Secondary would be more from like a color correction program like Resolve. If I'm going to export an EDL list from there, I would save it here. It just keeps me, helps me keep track of what's coming from where, and it's helpful. So final exports, just like it sounds, that's where when we're all done with the project, we're going to export our different versions of the project for delivery here. The compressed folder will contain all the various different destinations we have, be it for online or YouTube or things like that, or DVD, things like that. And then the masters will contain those high resolution, low or no compression versions that we use as our masters. Now in the footage folder, this could be broken out in a number of ways depending on what kind of work you do, but for us we have A-roll, B-roll, and legacy. So A-roll is going to be our on-camera talent, or in the case of narrative, it would be where we have actors on camera speaking. B-roll would be either establishing shots, cutaway shots, or for us it's that B-roll of a hand touching a camera or something like that. Legacy could mean a couple different things. For us, it oftentimes means footage that we're pulling from another segment that we've brought in, or maybe if you're doing a documentary, that might be like newsreel footage. So you can break that down however you want. And then maybe even further, this might be getting a little too, too deep, but under A-roll, we could break it out into close-up, medium, and wide shots if it fit our style. And even further, maybe even in close-ups, we could break that out into different actors. So then if you're looking for a close-up of quote-unquote actor 1, it would be footage, A-roll, close-up, actor 1, and you know whatever is in there is going to be a close-up of that actor. So it just helps you sort of streamline where you would look for footage. So back in here, in the graphics folder, we could have folders for logos or photos, maybe even a folder for fonts. We don't have that in there by default because we don't tend to move our drives around very much, but if you were taking a drive to various different computers for whatever reason, it might be handy to have the fonts that you need right in there. And then finally, renders. So as opposed to our final exports, these are all those sort of in-between exports. So this would be my exported versions of my Camtasia screen records that I'm going to use in my editor. Maybe under graphics, it could be lower thirds with alpha channel that I've created. Intermediate would be if I'm using an intermediate codec to edit, I would put those transcoded versions in there. If I was going to use proxies, I would put the transcoded proxies in there. And then visual effects, I would put those final rendered versions in there for use in the editor. And that's pretty much how our template is designed. It works for us. Again, you could modify this to suit your needs, but the general idea is to have a template that works for you and to stick to it so that across projects, it's easy for you to find footage. It's always sort of resting in the same place, and it just really increases your efficiency.
There isn't one right way to organize your folders. The best advice we can give you is to consider your folder structure carefully. And once you've got a system that works, be consistent and use it for every project. Once your folder structure is in place, it's time to sort all those assets. If you're working on your own, this is the time to rename your files and add any metadata as well. Of course, the same policy goes for file naming. The goal is to be consistent across projects, so you'll be able to tell as much as possible about a file just by looking at the name. Let's take a look at one example.
All right, so what we're looking at here is some multicam footage and audio that we took for a deconstructing editing series. And this was about Scott Pilgrim versus the World. So looking at our naming system here, we've got a 2-shot, a single shot of one host, a single shot of the other host, and then also the audio for each host. So the way that we labeled it is by using the take number, an indication of what project it was for, and then a shot descriptor. So if we look at this first one here, 01 means this is take 1. Pilgrim is because it's for the Scott Pilgrim versus the World shoot. 2-shot means, hey, it's the 2-shot. Moving over here, same exact thing to lead with, take 1 for Scott Pilgrim, but this time it's just Andy. Here we have take 1 Scott Pilgrim, the audio for Andy, so it's the exact same title, but the file obviously is different. Take 1 Scott Pilgrim Dan, take 1 Scott Pilgrim Dan audio, and then moving on we have take 2, and then the rest follows the same. So even if I weren't looking at the images here, so I'm going to switch to list view. Even if I'm just looking at this, I can tell everything I need to know about these shots just from reading it. I know this is take 1 from Scott Pilgrim and it's a 2-shot. I know this one is take 1 from Scott Pilgrim and it's Andy's shot. I know this is Andy's audio and this is Dan's video and Dan's audio. And then all of these group 2, take 2s are grouped together as well. So it's just a really effective way, and I always label my multicam footage in this same exact manner so that I get used to it and it's far less confusing. And then when I bring them into the editor, I know which clips belong with which, I can sync up the audio and video, and it makes it really easy. So you can come up with a system that works for you. Again, the idea is to be consistent. The other thing that we could do at this point is open up this folder in maybe Adobe Bridge or a program like that and go ahead and add any metadata that wasn't included in the original or that we just want to be able to search this footage by. So, that can include a whole host of things. So, we might put that Dan is the one on camera here. We might put that it's for Scott Pilgrim. We might put the take number, things like that, just so that I could always go back into Bridge and actually search for footage. So that just sort of depends on how much footage you have and how often you need to search through it with those sort of metadata. Now, again, the naming structure will help us identify stuff by seeing it, but the metadata just gives you another searchable feature, so you can use that as well.
With your folder structure in place and your footage properly renamed and sorted, you're one step closer to actually starting your edit.
Thanks for watching. If you want to watch the whole course called Post-Production Workflow, go to videomaker.com/courses or click the link in the description.